Step into the enigmatic world where medieval alchemy teetered between divine revelation and mortal peril. Within candlelit chambers, scholars pursued arcane wisdom that held the power to transmute lead into gold or damn their souls to everlasting fire. Before we delve into history's hidden corridors, tell me, where does this message find you tonight, and what hour graces your corner of the world? Whether you're nestled in Prague's twilight or witnessing Tokyo's first light, I'm honoured to guide you through one of history's most enigmatic arcs. If these journeys into humanity's shadowed past intrigue you, let the subscribe button be your compass, ensuring no future exploration escapes your notice. Now, lower the lights and let your imagination drift with me to an era when science and sorcery blurred and a single misstep could lead to revelation or the executioner's axe. The medieval age was a tapestry of contradictions, where fragile sparks of knowledge battled the consuming void of ignorance and fear. Here, alchemy arose not as mere proto-chemistry, but as something far more perilous and intoxicating. It was the forbidden craft that vowed to unravel creation's mysteries, to transform not just matter, but the very essence of the spirit. Imagine, if you dare, a vaulted cellar buried beneath ancient monastery stones. The air is heavy with the pungent fumes of sulphur and mercury, while cryptic symbols adorn every surface, their secrets decipherable only to the chosen few. Bathed in the flickering glow of candlelight, a cloaked figure bends over simmering retorts and radiant furnaces, striving to replicate the divine act of creation itself. This was the realm of the alchemist, where the sacred and the profane melded into something far more ominous. To uncover the true shadows lurking within medieval alchemy, we must first comprehend its deep entanglement with the spiritual and political tapestry of the era. The Catholic Church, that formidable institution governing every facet of medieval existence, regarded alchemy with both intrigue and dread. While many clergymen were themselves practitioners, viewing the craft as a means to fathom God's creation more profoundly, the ecclesiastical hierarchy also recognized the peril of empowering ordinary men to manipulate the very fabric of existence. At its core, alchemy was built upon a philosophy that was at once devoutly Christian and dangerously unorthodox. Alchemists held that all matter bore a spiritual essence, that the physical and metaphysical realms were inseparably intertwined. This pursuit transcended the mere transmutation of lead into gold, though that remained its most legendary and coveted ambition. Their pursuit centered on attaining what they termed the great work, the magnum opus. This intricate process aimed to culminate in the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, a legendary substance capable not only of transmuting base metals, but also bestowing eternal life and supreme wisdom. Yet within this ambition lay the first traces of corruption. By asserting they could forge such a stone, alchemists implicitly claimed the ability to replicate or even exceed divine power. They aspired to ascend to godlike status, commanding life and death, crafting perfection within an imperfect world. Such audacious assertions drew scrutiny from church authorities, who increasingly viewed alchemy not merely as natural philosophy, but as a defiance of the divine order. Alchemical texts were intentionally veiled in cryptic language, cloaked in symbols and metaphors that both safeguarded their secrets and shielded practitioners from persecution. Mercury, sulphur, and salt emerged as the three philosophical principles embodying spirit, soul and body, respectively. The union of the Red King and White Queen epitomized the harmonious fusion of opposites essential for transmutation. Meanwhile, dragons consuming their own tails symbolized the eternal cycle inherent to the alchemical journey. Beneath these ostensibly innocuous symbols, however, lurked far more sinister undertones. Take the concept of the nigredo, or blackening, the initial phase of the alchemical process. This was not merely a chemical transformation, but a profound spiritual ordeal, symbolizing the necessary decay and dissolution preceding rebirth. Alchemists spoke of slaying the king, of reducing perfection into primordial chaos so that it might be reconstituted in a more exalted form. Such imagery was violent, unsettling, and to many outright sacrilegious. How could devout Christians speak so casually of death and disintegration, even metaphorically? The practitioners themselves were often societal outcasts. Scholars who had ventured too far into forbidden texts, physicians disillusioned with the constraints of traditional medicine, or desperate individuals lured by the promise of transmutational riches. They congregated in clandestine brotherhoods, united by solemn oaths and a shared pursuit of knowledge deemed perilous by the wider world. Among the most infamous figures in medieval alchemy was the enigmatic Geber, whose true identity remains hotly debated to this day. While some scholars attribute these works to the 8th century Islamic polymath Jabir ibn Hayyan, others maintain that Geber served as a collective pseudonym for multiple European alchemists, irrespective of the author's true identity. The texts ascribed to Geber describe processes that verge on the occult. His writings detail the creation of artificial life, corrosive substances capable of dissolving any material, and lethal powders that could kill with mere contact. The quest for the philosopher's stone drove many alchemists toward increasingly sinister pursuits. Some ventured into human experimentation, convinced that the principles governing metallic transmutation could also alter the human body and soul. Dark rumors circulated of alchemists attempting to craft homunculi, artificial beings cultivated in glass vessels, sustained by blood and other abhorrent substances. If such creatures existed at all, they were said to wield knowledge surpassing mortal understanding, but at a price no virtuous individual would dare pay. The economic ramifications of alchemy proved equally unsettling. A successful method of transmuting base metals into gold could topple entire kingdoms within days. The fragile equilibrium of power among monarchs, merchants, and the church relied fundamentally on the scarcity and inherent worth of precious metals. A skilled alchemist possessed the theoretical capacity to disrupt this delicate equilibrium, potentially saturating the market with gold and thereby devaluing the currency entirely. Unsurprisingly, numerous monarchs regarded alchemists with deep mistrust, even as they covertly financed their experiments, hoping to secure an edge against their adversaries. To most observers of the time, a medieval alchemist's workshop would have appeared like a nightmarish vision of the infernal. The air hung thick with the acrid fumes of chemicals and smouldering substances, creating an environment that was as physically noxious as it was metaphorically sinister. Bizarre instruments crowded every available space. Glass vessels coiled with serpentine tubes stood in arrangements that seemed better suited for conjuring spirits than advancing the study of natural philosophy. The walls were frequently adorned with intricate charts mapping the celestial correspondences between planets, metals, and human organs. a testament to the alchemical conviction that the microcosm of man reflected the macrocosm of the cosmos. Within these chambers, alchemists conducted procedures bearing names evocative of torment and execution. They meticulously pursued calcination, dissolution, separation, conjunction, putrefaction, coagulation, cibation, sublimation, fermentation, exaltation, multiplication, and projection. Each phase demanded exacting conditions, impeccable timing, and frequently hazardous materials. Mercury, that enigmatic liquid metal defying conventional states of matter, was both highly valued and extraordinarily hazardous. Its toxic vapors could induce madness, triggering tremors, memory deterioration, and ultimately fatal consequences. The standing of alchemists in society remained tenuous at best. While revered scholars such as Albertus Magnus and Roger Bacon engaged in alchemy alongside their academic pursuits, many practitioners occupied an ambiguous space between legitimacy and notoriety. They frequently faced accusations of deception, especially when their promised transmutations never came to fruition. Monarchs and nobles who had financed alchemical endeavours sometimes turned wrathfully against their former protégés when the anticipated gold failed to materialize, denouncing them as fraudsters who had deceitfully squandered royal coffers. The link between alchemy and the occult remained ever present, subtly woven into even the most erudite writings. Though alchemists insisted their craft was rooted in natural philosophy, their techniques often incorporated rituals indistinguishable from sorcery. They meticulously timed their experiments with celestial alignments, convinced that planetary and stellar configurations governed the outcome of their work. Their vessels were engraved with symbols bearing an unsettling resemblance to the sigils used in demonic rituals. They burned aromatic incenses and chanted verses that could readily be mistaken for arcane spells. Most troubling of all was how alchemy gradually permeated medical practice. Alchemist physicians such as Paracelsus asserted that the principles governing metal transmutation could also restore health to the human body. They concocted medicines of unparalleled potency, substances capable of curing ailments once deemed incurable. Yet these very remedies, in higher doses, often became lethal poisons, blurring the boundary between remedy and ruin. The quest for the fabled Elixir of Life, said to bestow immortality, drove some alchemists to experiment with ever more exotic and perilous materials. They distilled the blood of youthful men, convinced it held the essence of vitality. They endeavoured to distill the quintessential properties from gemstones, botanical specimens, and even human cadavers. Certain practitioners professed to have uncovered techniques for perpetual bodily preservation, formulating what they termed the philosophical mercury, a substance believed to halt decay and defy mortality. Yet the most sinister dimension of medieval alchemy lay in its entanglement with power and corruption. Monarchs and nobles who pursued alchemical wisdom were seldom motivated by the pursuit of enlightenment. They craved weapons, they lusted for gold, they coveted the means to subjugate and overpower their rivals. The secrets held by alchemists could be wielded to concoct untraceable poisons, explosives capable of reducing fortress walls to rubble, or corrosive acids that dissolved even the sturdiest armour. The renowned alchemist John Dee, advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, epitomised this perilous nexus of knowledge and authority. Dee asserted that he communed with celestial beings through his crystal sphere, receiving divine guidance for alchemical processes that would secure England's supremacy over the globe. His sway over the Queen was so profound that many believed he employed alchemical arts to bewitch her, subtly bending her will to his designs through arcane means. The experimental methods of medieval alchemists frequently incorporated practices that deliberately blurred the boundaries between science and the supernatural. They meticulously timed their work to coincide with specific lunar phases, convinced that celestial influences determined the outcome of their endeavours. Before undertaking crucial transmutations, they engaged in rigorous purification rituals, not only for their materials, but also for themselves, fasting and praying for days on end. Some even asserted that the mere presence of a pregnant or menstruating woman could doom an entire operation, a stark reflection of the pervasive misogyny of medieval society. The substances chosen for alchemical experiments were selected as much for their allegorical meaning as for their chemical properties. Cinnabar, with its vivid crimson hue, symbolized the lifeblood of the antimony, capable of refining gold while corroding lesser metals, became an emblem of spiritual refinement through adversity. Lead, the most base of metals, represented humanity's fallen nature, while gold stood as the ultimate embodiment of divine perfection. These symbolic connections transcended poetic metaphor. Alchemists maintained that such correspondences revealed profound truths about reality itself. The creation of the Philosopher's Stone was said to demand not only years, sometimes decades of meticulous labour, but also the alchemist's spiritual transformation. Numerous practitioners asserted that only those who attained moral and spiritual purity, having conquered humanity's baser instincts, could succeed in forging the stone, just as it transmuted base metals into noble ones. This conviction drove some alchemists to adopt severe ascetic disciplines, denying themselves sustenance, rest, and companionship in their quest for the purity essential to their craft. Yet the relentless pursuit of perfection often yielded its antithesis. Isolated from society, toiling alone amid hazardous substances and noxious vapours, many alchemists descended into madness. Their obsession eclipsed all else: families, health, even their own souls, as they fixated on their work. Some professed divine revelations, guiding their experiments, while others attributed these visions to delirium induced by mercury poisoning or sheer insanity. The economic influence of alchemy reached well beyond the confines of individual practitioners' workshops. The allure of inexpensive gold drew substantial investments from merchants and nobles enticed by the prospect of immense wealth. Vast fortunes were poured into alchemical research, resources that might otherwise have alleviated the hardships of ordinary citizens or supported more pragmatic ventures. When these ventures ultimately collapsed, the resulting economic repercussions spread across society, exacerbating the financial instability that characterized much of medieval Europe. The dynamic between alchemy and the nascent universities was intricate and frequently contentious. While certain scholars accepted alchemy as a valid discipline within natural philosophy, others condemned it as a distortion of genuine scholarship. Universities were intended to be bastions of open knowledge, yet alchemy thrived on secrecy. Academic discourse was meant to proceed through reasoned debate, But alchemical controversies often descended into charges of ineptitude, deceit, or even diabolical influence. Instruments and devices crafted by medieval alchemists showcased remarkable ingenuity. Yet they also harboured the potential for catastrophe. The Athanor, or philosopher's furnace, could achieve temperatures far surpassing ordinary fires, intense enough to liquefy metals previously thought unmeltable. The Pelican, a specialised vessel engineered for perpetual liquid circulation, was capable of concentrating substances to perilously potent levels. The YIC distillation apparatus could isolate the most volatile and reactive elements from seemingly stable compounds. These were not mere laboratory tools, they were instruments of power, easily repurposed for devastation. The methods employed to refine metals could equally distill lethal poison. The furnaces designed for transmutation could forge weapons of unparalleled destructive force. Some alchemists openly bragged of their skill in crafting Greek fire, the legendary incendiary weapon that burned even on water and defied conventional extinguishment. The shroud of secrecy enveloping alchemy was not merely to safeguard proprietary knowledge, it was a matter of survival. In an era when the Church could brand individuals as heretics for dissenting views on transubstantiation, alchemy's assertion of transforming substances at their most elemental level posed an inherent threat. The Inquisition maintained vigilant oversight of alchemical practitioners, ever prepared to probe allegations of demonic involvement or heretical doctrine. Alchemists employed coded language to articulate their methods, serving several critical functions. This obscure terminology shielded them from persecution by rendering their work indecipherable to the uninitiated. It also cultivated an aura of exclusivity and intrigue, drawing new adherents to the craft. Most significantly, however, it enabled them to advance assertions that defied straightforward verification or refutation. If an alchemical experiment faltered, the practitioner could attribute the failure to a misinterpretation of the encoded instructions rather than a foundational flaw in the theory itself. Alchemy's impact on medieval medicine was especially concerning. Physician alchemists argued that ailments stemmed from imbalances in the body's core principles, akin to impurities in metals arising from elemental disequilibrium. Consequently, their prescribed remedies often proved more perilous than the maladies they sought to alleviate. Patients were administered compounds laced with mercury, arsenic, and other lethal elements, rationalized by the alchemical doctrine that proper processing could transmute these toxins into curative remedies. The pursuit of the universal solvent, a hypothetical substance capable of dissolving all matter, epitomized the perilous aspirations of medieval alchemists. Such a discovery would have held immense value, whether for extracting precious metals from raw ores or revolutionizing medical treatments. Yet it would also have posed an existential threat, a weapon of unfathomable devastation. The mere notion of concocting a substance that could erode any vessel, breach any barrier, or nullify any defense should have given pause to those who pondered its ramifications. The alchemical principle of correspondence, the conviction that all things in the cosmos were interlinked through hidden sympathies and influences, gave rise to practices that modern sensibilities would deem, at best, irrational and, at worst, hazardous. Alchemists clung to the belief that manipulating metals could alter human health, that synthesizing artificial gold might bestow divine abilities, and that their endeavours' outcomes hinged on their moral purity and spiritual enlightenment. As we peer further into the shadows enveloping medieval alchemy, it becomes evident how this ostensibly noble quest for wisdom became enmeshed with humanity's most primal cravings: power, riches, and dominance over others. The alchemist's workshop was not merely a crucible of knowledge, but a smithy where ambition and despair were forged into methods that jeopardized the very fabric of medieval civilization. The apprenticeship model governing the dissemination of alchemical lore was especially vulnerable to exploitation. Eager young men, desperate to uncover the secrets of transmutation, would bind themselves as apprentices to masters whose actual knowledge remained uncertain. These initiates were bound by oaths of secrecy, isolated from the outside world, and endured years of grueling labour that often proved to be nothing more than an elaborate ruse. Some masters exploited their apprentices as test subjects for perilous experiments, rationalizing the dangers by insisting that the discoveries would ultimately serve humanity. The gender dynamics of alchemy mirrored, and at times intensified, the pervasive misogyny of medieval society. Though exceptional women, such as the famed Mary the Prophetess, were acknowledged for their alchemical breakthroughs, the field remained dominated by men who saw feminine influence as a threat to their work. The alchemical process itself was frequently depicted through violent sexual imagery, with metals forcibly united in what was termed the chemical marriage. This language was more than mere metaphor. It revealed deeply ingrained beliefs about power and transformation, carrying troubling implications for how these practitioners perceived and treated real women. The global network of alchemists facilitated the spread of hazardous knowledge across political and cultural divides. Texts banned in one kingdom could swiftly reappear in another, translated and reinterpreted to suit new contexts. Islamic alchemical knowledge gradually permeated Christian Europe through Spain and Sicily, introducing sophisticated techniques and theories that European authorities perceived as potentially destabilizing. Conversely, European advancements in alchemy circulated throughout the Islamic world and beyond, fostering an international network of practitioners who operated independently of any secular authority. The economic ramifications of successful alchemy extended well beyond the mere production of gold. If alchemists could indeed transform base metals into precious ones, they would hold the power to manipulate the entire monetary framework of medieval Europe. Since currency values relied on the limited supply of precious metals, unrestrained gold production would have undermined the very economic pillars of feudal society. Certain rulers covertly sponsored alchemical research while publicly denouncing it, seeking to outmaneuver their adversaries while denying them the same revolutionary discovery. The interplay between alchemy and astrology further shrouded the practice in mystery. Alchemists were convinced that their experiments required precise celestial timing, that planetary and stellar alignments directly influenced the outcome of their work. This was not simply about selecting favourable dates. Rather, it suggested that human endeavours were governed by cosmic forces far beyond mortal influence. These convictions contradicted the Christian principle of free will, implying that supreme authority lay not with God, but with those capable of harnessing these occult forces. The safeguarding of alchemical wisdom within secret societies and encrypted manuscripts fostered an alternative intellectual tradition, one that coexisted with, and occasionally challenged, the sanctioned doctrines of both church and academia. These clandestine networks enabled perilous ideas to endure eras of suppression while disseminating through channels that eluded official surveillance or regulation. Their mere existence suggested certain truths were deemed too hazardous for public dissemination, knowledge requiring meticulous protection and selective transmission to initiates alone. The psychological burden of alchemical pursuit was profound, yet frequently overlooked by those fixated solely on its promised rewards. Practitioners endured years of solitude, handling toxic substances, while repeating enigmatic procedures that often yielded inexplicable failures. Prolonged exposure to mercury vapors alone inflicted irreversible neurological harm, yet alchemists routinely handled arsenic, lead, and other cumulative toxins that permeated their systems over time. The resulting chronic poisoning frequently manifested as hallucinations, misinterpreted as celestial revelation or infernal possession, further obscuring the boundary between empirical study and mystical belief. The pursuit of artificial life arguably embodied medieval alchemy's most sinister aspiration. Certain alchemists professed to have fabricated homunculi, diminutive, artificially cultivated humans nurtured in glass vessels through arcane processes. Legend endowed these creatures with preternatural wisdom and capabilities. Yet their manufacture demanded materials and methods that would have appalled any moral individual. Many viewed the mere endeavour to artificially create life as an audacious encroachment upon divine authority, a transgression so severe it merited the harshest retribution. Alchemy's impact on medieval warfare ran deep, though much of it remains obscured in historical accounts. Alchemists in service to military commanders did not merely refine alloys for weapons and armour. They engineered incendiary concoctions, noxious vapours, and other armaments that defied the chivalric ethos of medieval warfare. The expertise required to manufacture such weapons was closely protected, yet its mere existence profoundly altered the strategic considerations of military strategists and political rulers across Europe. The interplay between alchemy and nascent banking systems was intricate and frequently tainted by corruption. Merchants professing alchemical expertise could lure investors and creditors eager to capitalize on the promise of transmutation. Some exploited this purported knowledge to devise elaborate financial ploys, essentially early iterations of pyramid or Ponzi schemes. When these ventures inevitably unraveled, they frequently dragged down entire merchant dynasties and banking families, exacerbating the economic turmoil that afflicted much of medieval Europe. The medicinal uses of alchemy were especially perilous, as they blended legitimate therapeutic benefits with poorly understood toxic side effects. Remedies containing mercury or antimony might effectively treat certain ailments, yet they could also inflict irreversible harm on the nervous system, kidneys, or other vital organs. Patients who recovered from their initial illness often found themselves afflicted by new disorders induced by the treatment, trapping them in a vicious cycle of dependence on ever more esoteric and hazardous remedies. Perhaps the most pernicious facet of alchemy was its spiritual pretensions, which cloaked fundamentally materialistic and self-serving practices in the guise of religious devotion. Alchemists asserted that their craft was a form of prayer, that metal transmutation mirrored the soul's ascent to perfection, and that the philosopher's stone symbolized divine grace. Their assertions enabled them to frame their quest for wealth and power as an act of religious piety, rendering it challenging for ecclesiastical authorities to denounce their endeavours without seeming to obstruct spiritual growth itself. Medieval alchemical practices exacted a heavy environmental toll, which practitioners largely disregarded in their single-minded pursuit of immediate objectives. The furnaces employed for transmutation devoured vast amounts of wood and charcoal, accelerating deforestation in regions surrounding major alchemical hubs. Toxic byproducts from failed experiments were routinely discarded into waterways or buried haphazardly, polluting water sources and soil for decades to come. The air surrounding alchemical workshops grew noxious from the relentless release of mercury vapours, sulphurous compounds, and other hazardous fumes. As we conclude our journey into the shadowy depths of medieval alchemy, we are confronted with a sobering realization. Humanity's loftiest ambitions can become tainted when pursued without ethical boundaries or societal accountability. Most medieval alchemists were not inherently malevolent. They were scholars driven by intellectual curiosity and ambition, striving to uncover knowledge that might benefit all of mankind. Yet their clandestine methods, insular practices, and disregard for the repercussions of their work forged a tradition as perilous as it was captivating. The influence of medieval alchemy extends well beyond its eventual contribution to the emergence of modern chemistry. It fostered a culture of clandestine research, where knowledge was jealously guarded by elites and technological progress advanced heedless of societal consequences. These patterns would recur persistently throughout history, from the alchemical workshops of the Renaissance to the classified facilities of the nuclear era. The true peril of medieval alchemy lay not in supernatural malevolence, but in humanity's timeless impulse to chase power and knowledge without wisdom, to pursue transformation without comprehension, to vow miracles while birthing monstrosities. In their relentless pursuit of transmuting base metals into gold, medieval alchemists uncovered something far more unsettling: how readily noble aspirations can be perverted, and the devastating toll society bears when brilliant minds pursue their ambitions unchecked. As you slip into slumber tonight, you may envision those ancient workshops, flickering flames, bubbling alembics, robed figures hunched over their arcane endeavours, but bear in mind that the true horror of medieval alchemy lay not in its failures, but in its fleeting triumphs. Those moments when practitioners glimpsed genuine power and pursued it at any cost. The medieval world was veiled in enigma, yet no practice proved more treacherous than the shadowed art of alchemy. While peasants laboured in fields under their lord's gaze, a daring few ventured into forbidden realms of knowledge that pledged unimaginable dominion. These were not erudite scholars from hallowed universities, but desperate outcasts lurking at society's margins, conducting experiments in hidden cellars and forsaken monasteries, far from the scrutiny of ecclesiastical authority. By the 14th century, alchemy had transcended its primitive pursuit of transmuting base metals into gold, evolving into something far more sinister, a practice that undermined the very fabric of medieval society. The alchemists of this era were no longer driven by mere material gain. Their ambitions were far grander. They sought to create life itself, to defy mortality, and to usurp the natural order ordained by divine will. Take, for instance, the case of Brother Marcus, a Benedictine monk who renounced his vows in 1347 to dedicate himself to the great work beneath the crumbling ruins of an abandoned priory in dim subterranean chambers. He assembled an intricate laboratory stocked with glass vessels, blazing furnaces, and esoteric apparatus. Centuries later, his recovered journals unveiled experiments so horrifying they would unsettle even modern scientists. Within their pages, he detailed the creation of artificial beings, homunculi, by blending human blood with mercury and sulfur under precise astrological alignments. The procedure was a grotesque perversion of divine creation. Marcus would commence his work during the moon's darkest phase, when malevolent spirits were believed to roam most freely. He would heat mercury in an airtight container for 40 consecutive days and nights, incorporating drops of blood extracted from executed criminals at the precise moment of their death. The resulting compound, he asserted, would twist and throb with a sinister vitality of its own. Yet Marcus did not operate in isolation. A clandestine network of renegade alchemists spanned Europe, exchanging forbidden knowledge through encrypted manuscripts and cryptic symbols etched into monastery walls. They spoke in a cryptic lexicon of dragons and lions, of red kings and white queens, masking their true intentions from those who would condemn them as heretics and send them to the pyre. The Church retaliated with ruthless efficiency. In 1317, Pope Innocent IV issued the papal bull Spondent quas non exhibent, explicitly denouncing alchemical practices as diabolical heresy. This persecution only forced the practitioners further into secrecy, rendering their work more perilous and their techniques more radical. Consider the infamous case of Nicholas Flamel, the Parisian scribe who professed to have uncovered the philosopher's stone. Though history records him as a triumphant alchemist who achieved transmutation, the grimmer reality lies in the extremes of his methods. Concealed beneath his scriptorium, FLL's clandestine workshop resembled a charnel house of alchemical experimentation. In his relentless pursuit of immortality, he employed macabre ingredients, human remains, grave soil, and the blood of newborns, convinced that life essence held the secret to his elusive elixir. The psychological burden on such practitioners proved devastating. Chronic exposure to mercury vapors induced tremors, hallucinations, and irreversible cognitive decline. Numerous alchemists described haunting visions in which demons guided their work, while others boasted of striking infernal bargains in exchange for forbidden knowledge. The boundary between scientific exploration and supernatural obsession grew disturbingly indistinct. Medieval alchemy's true peril lay in its parasitic infiltration of legitimate scholarship. Monasteries, once bastions of erudition, transformed into hotbeds of heretical experimentation. Monks, armed with ancient manuscripts and laboratory tools, succumbed to the lure of perilous research. Thus, the very institutions entrusted with safeguarding Christian wisdom found themselves hollowed by corruption from within. The alchemists cultivated an intricate mythology surrounding their craft, tracing their lineage to Hermes Trismegistus, while synthesizing elements from Islamic, Jewish, and pagan traditions. They were convinced that their art could undo humanity's fall, restoring mankind to Adam's pristine state before the taint of original sin. This went far beyond simple metallurgy. It constituted a direct confrontation with Christian orthodoxy. Even their equipment revealed a tale of obsession and peril. Alchemical laboratories brimmed with pelican vessels and intricate retorts, each meticulously crafted for distinct phases of the magnum opus. The acrid stench of sulphur and smouldering metals saturated these chambers, while the relentless heat from blazing furnaces rendered them almost uninhabitable. Countless alchemists endured severe burns and respiratory ailments as occupational hazards. Still, they persevered, fueled by dreams of transcendent power. Most unsettling of all were their experiments on human subjects. During the medieval period, alchemists held the conviction that the human body's microcosm mirrored the universe's macrocosm. They performed vivisections on condemned criminals and individuals suffering from mental illness, driven by a quest to uncover the seat of the soul and the fundamental mechanisms of life. Conducted in secrecy and devoid of ethical boundaries, these practices amounted to a wholesale rejection of Christian moral principles. The influence of alchemy reached far beyond its practitioners, disrupting entire communities when experiments spiraled out of control. Toxic vapors contaminated water supplies, mysterious fires engulfed structures, and inexplicable diseases swept through populations. With no grasp of chemical principles, the populace ascribed these calamities to witchcraft and demonic forces, fueling witch hunts and widespread panic. The economic upheaval proved equally devastating. Alchemists' boasts of gold production sparked rampant counterfeiting and currency devaluation. Kings and nobles, desperate to finance their wars, covertly funded alchemical pursuits, eroding the foundations of medieval monetary stability. The allure of infinite gold corroded society as thoroughly as any alchemical acid. Women also became entangled in this shadowy realm, though their roles diverged from their male counterparts. Female practitioners often mastered poisons and love potions, harnessing their expertise in herbs and distillation to craft lethal or manipulative elixirs. Operating on the fringes of medieval society, these women catered to nobles seeking discreet eliminations or spousal subjugation. The religious ramifications were profound and chilling. Alchemy embodied a radical defiance of divine order, supplanting trust in God's will with faith in humanity's power to bend nature. Alchemists viewed themselves either as God's collaborators or, in some cases, as challengers to celestial authority. Such arrogance inevitably resulted in moral decay and, as per ecclesiastical teachings, everlasting condemnation. Safeguarding alchemical wisdom demanded intricate protective strategies. Manuscripts were encrypted in numerous ciphers, concealed behind false partitions, or interred in isolated sites. The most perilous formulations were memorized and transmitted exclusively through master-apprentice succession, forging clandestine traditions that endured across centuries. Certain knowledge was intentionally dispersed, with different practitioners retaining fragments of greater formulas to ensure no individual could amass excessive influence. By the waning of the Middle Ages, alchemy's impact had profoundly saturated European civilization. What originated as a pursuit of physical transmutation evolved into an all-encompassing intellectual framework that questioned every facet of medieval existence. Alchemical workshops sowed the origins of the scientific revolution, yet simultaneously nurtured esoteric beliefs and mystical ideologies that would endure for ages. The heritage of medieval alchemy stands as a sobering testament to the perils of unfettered knowledge seeking. These practitioners, fueled by relentless ambition and dire necessity, forged an underground discipline that functioned beyond the reach of religious and societal governance. Their contributions significantly expanded humanity's grasp of chemistry and metallurgy, yet exacted a devastating toll in human suffering and societal upheaval. The profound darkness of medieval alchemy resided not in its inability to turn lead into gold, but in its alarming capacity to distort the human soul beyond recognition. The quest for transmutation marked only the first step in alchemy's ominous journey into forbidden realms. As practitioners probed deeper into the mysteries of matter and spirit, they ventured into domains that both church and society condemned not merely as heretical, but as perilously transgressive. Concealed in castle dungeons or secluded forest clearings, the alchemical laboratory transformed into an operational stage where the line between science and sorcery blurred entirely. The true menace of medieval alchemy lay not in its failed attempts to produce gold, but in its chilling success at forging something far more disturbing, a clandestine web of knowledge that threatened the very pillars of medieval society. Alchemists came to regard themselves as an elect few, entrusted with divine truths that set them apart from ordinary humanity. Such arrogance propelled them toward pursuits that remain staggering even today, both in their boldness and their ethical disregard. Take, for instance, the case of Roger Bacon, the 13th century Franciscan friar whose alchemical endeavours aroused suspicion even within his own order. Bacon's meticulously encoded writings, designed to evade persecution, allude to experiments that transcended the mere transmutation of base metal. He described the artificial creation of life, the indefinite extension of human existence, and the mastery of nature's fundamental forces through alchemical means. Rumours circulated that his contemporary, Albertus Magnus, had fashioned an artificial man, a homunculus capable of speech and reasoning akin to a human. These accounts were neither fanciful tales nor mere allegory. Medieval alchemists earnestly pursued the creation of life from inanimate matter, dedicating themselves to this ambition with near obsessive fervour. According to alchemical manuscripts, crafting a homunculus entailed blending human bodily fluids with specific metals and minerals, followed by meticulously controlled cycles of heating and cooling spanning months or even years. The ethical ramifications of such experiments were either disregarded or excused through intricate theological reasoning. The alchemical quest for immortality proved even more perilous. Unlike contemporary medical research, which aims to prolong healthy lifespans, medieval alchemists frequently sought eternal life through methods that demanded the exploitation or annihilation of others. Some practitioners even claimed that forging the legendary Philosopher's Stone necessitated human sacrifice. Nicholas Fll, arguably the most renowned alchemist of the medieval era, was said to have attained immortality through his alchemical pursuits. Yet persistent rumours shadowed his legacy, questioning the true origin of his prolonged existence. These suspicions were not without merit. Contemporary alchemical manuscripts reveal unsettling accounts of experiments involving human blood, organs, and other bodily substances. As practitioners endeavoured to manipulate the very essence of life, the boundary between alchemy and necromancy grew disturbingly indistinct. Certain alchemists asserted that the vitality of youth could be extracted from the young and infused into the elderly, a belief that spawned grotesque experiments reminiscent of the most macabre tales. The shroud of secrecy enveloping these practices only deepened their malevolence. To shield their work from scrutiny, alchemists devised intricate systems of symbols, ciphers, and veiled language. What seemed like instructions for turning lead into gold might, in truth, conceal formulas for lethal toxins or arcane rituals. Even the iconic alchemical emblem of the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail, assumed a darker significance when interpreted as a metaphor for the perpetual cycle of destruction and rebirth that alchemists sought to control. This culture of concealment fostered its own descent into shadow. Alchemical societies gradually transformed into insular enclaves where moral boundaries dissolved under the weight of collective pressure and mutual complicity. Young initiates were systematically indoctrinated into ever more dubious practices, their moral sensibilities dulled by a steady diet of intellectual justification and incremental exposure to atrocities. The quest for knowledge devolved into an obsessive pursuit, utterly detached from ethical constraints or regard for human suffering. Economic incentives further corrupted alchemy's foundations. Affluent patrons, driven by greed for gold or dreams of immortality, bankrolled experiments with little scrutiny of their methods. Alchemists, compelled to deliver tangible results at any cost, resorted to increasingly reckless and hazardous endeavours, staking everything on the elusive promise of ultimate success. Social ostracisation exacerbated their ethical decline. Shunned by conventional society and denounced by religious authorities, they forged isolated communities governed by their own warped moral codes. To the average medieval citizen, such practices would have been unimaginable, yet within alchemical circles they became disturbingly commonplace. The sacrifice of human lives for experimentation, the plundering of graves for corpses, the abduction of children for unspeakable rituals, all were justified under the warped rationale of alchemical ambition. Most unsettling of all was how legitimate scientific breakthroughs became entangled with these macabre pursuits. Alchemists undeniably made genuine strides in chemistry, metallurgy, and medicine. They pioneered innovative distillation methods, uncovered novel chemical compounds, and deepened humanity's grasp of natural phenomena. Yet these legitimate advancements were inextricably linked to the more sinister facets of their work, forging a legacy of knowledge that was as invaluable as it was tainted. The very tools of their trade reveal this descent into darkness. Alchemical laboratories housed bizarre instruments designed not merely for chemical refinement, but for the manipulation of life itself. Distillation apparatuses were repurposed to refine human blood and other bodily fluids, embodying the grim duality of their craft. The furnaces were specifically engineered to process materials no reputable artisan would ever dare to handle. Glass vessels displayed symbols and inscriptions unrelated to chemistry, instead serving as conduits for summoning and binding otherworldly forces. The psychological burden on the alchemists themselves proved devastating. Many exhibited symptoms, now identifiable as profound mental deterioration, induced by prolonged exposure to toxic substances, prolonged isolation, and the growing moral conflict inherent in their pursuit of forbidden knowledge. Their later writings frequently reveal paranoia, delusions of grandeur, and a stark erosion of basic human empathy. Gradually, they ceased to view others as fellow beings, instead perceiving them merely as resources for their experiments. This corruption extended beyond individuals, tainting entire circles of practitioners. shadowy societies emerged, no longer dedicated to scholarly enlightenment, but to amassing power through alchemical manipulation. These clandestine groups infiltrated royal courts, merchant alliances, and even religious orders, leveraging their arcane expertise to covertly shape events. The very veil of secrecy that shielded them from persecution also granted them unchecked influence, free from scrutiny or consequence. As these networks expanded in power and influence, they gradually emerged as a serious menace to societal stability. Monarchs and aristocrats who had once sponsored alchemists grew apprehensive, belatedly recognizing they had unleashed forces far beyond their command. The knowledge held by alchemists extended far beyond mere gold-making. It enabled the creation of undetectable poisons, the manipulation of minds through chemical means, and the ability to inflict death or madness upon distant foes. The environmental toll of alchemical practices was equally devastating, though poorly comprehended at the time. The quest for transmutation demanded vast quantities of mercury, lead, arsenic, and other hazardous materials, contaminating entire regions surrounding their laboratories. Wells were tainted, soil became infertile, and wildlife perished en masse. The alchemists themselves frequently succumbed to heavy metal poisoning, likely exacerbating their erratic conduct and moral decay. True tragedy of medieval alchemy lay not in its failure to achieve its professed aims, but in its grim success in revealing the depths to which humanity could descend in its relentless pursuit of knowledge and dominion. What began as a noble quest for truth ultimately degenerated into a trade of death. Their once hallowed workshops devolved into chambers of unspeakable horror. The hidden truths of how medieval alchemists served forbidden masters. Yet even as they chased these lofty ambitions of transmutation and enlightenment, many alchemists were lured into far darker realms that demanded not merely their expertise, but their very souls. For the pursuit of forbidden knowledge seldom comes without a cost, and in the medieval world that price was often exacted in blood, corruption, and bondage to forces better left undisturbed. Take, for instance, the enigmatic Brother Augustine, a 13th century Franciscan monk who maintained a secret laboratory beneath Sandon Monastery. By day, he tended to the sick and fulfilled his religious obligations with seeming piety. By night, he descended into chambers hewn from solid rock, where sulphurous fumes choked the air and ancient inscriptions, older than Christianity itself, lined the walls. Centuries later, Augustine's journals were discovered concealed behind a false wall, their pages chronicling the slow moral decay of a man who had once harbored noble aspirations. His earliest writings spoke of crafting medicines for the poor and transmuting lead into gold to fund the monastery's charitable endeavours. It became clear that Augustine, through his alchemical experiments, had forged a connection with an entity that granted him unimaginable power, yet exacted increasingly dire sacrifices in return. Initially, the price seemed trivial, a few drops of his own blood mingled into the crucible, or the ritual sacrifice of laboratory animals during precise lunar phases. But, as is ever the case with such bargains, the demands grew more grotesque. Augustine soon found himself prowling graveyards, gathering bone dust from freshly interred corpses. Whispers speak of midnight rites in secret chambers where he burned rare herbs as offerings while reciting incantations so potent they tore his throat raw. And then came the most chilling revelation. Augustine was not acting alone. He belonged to a sprawling network of tainted alchemists scattered across medieval Europe, all bound in servitude to the same malevolent forces. This cabal, known as the Ordo Mortis Aureus, the Order of the Golden Death, embodied the darkest undercurrent of medieval alchemy. While public figures like Albertus Magnus and Roger Bacon conducted their studies within the confines of Christian doctrine, these clandestine practitioners immersed themselves in forbidden arts, pursuits that would have condemned them to the pyre as heretics had their activities come to light. Their laboratories stood as profane temples where inverted crucifixes loomed overhead, and their instruments were anointed not with holy water, but with blood. They wielded not merely mercury and sulphur, but substances that defied the very laws of nature, powdered meteorites pulsing with an eerie inner radiance, crystallized essences drawn from the final breaths of plague-stricken victims, oils distilled from plants that thrived only in earth drenched with innocent blood. Their rituals were grotesque mockeries of the Christian Mass, where a priest would elevate the sacred host. These twisted alchemists raised vessels brimming with foul brews, a seething amalgam of human bile and molten silver. In place of hymns, they intoned Enochian incantations, each syllable warping the air with palpable malice. Their ambition was no less than the utter subversion of the natural order itself. They pursued not the fabled philosopher's stone, but something infinitely more dreadful. The lapis mortis, or death stone, a substance capable of bestowing immortality by devouring the very essence of life. The creation of this abhorrent artifact demanded the methodical defilement of every element involved. Water had to be drawn from wells tainted with the bones of saints. Fire had to be kindled with wood from trees blasted by lightning in violent storms. Earth had to be collected from the grounds of mass graves, and air had to be captured from the dying breaths of those consumed by despair. Each component bore not only its physical form, but also a spiritual taint that corrupted all it touched. The forging of the Death Stone was said to span 7 years, during which the alchemist would slowly relinquish fragments of their humanity to shadowy benefactors. They would begin to age in reverse, yet the price was unspeakable. Their memories would erode, supplanted by eldritch knowledge that drove countless minds to ruin. Their flesh would become hosts for entities from beyond the veil, sharing existence with consciousnesses that revelled in human agony as mere diversion. Brother Augustine's final journal entries chronicle the culmination of his magnum opus. He recounts the pivotal moment when the Death Stone finally materialized in his crucible, a perfect sphere of utter darkness that appeared to consume all light around it. Yet his victory proved fleeting. The journal concludes with a single phrase, scrawled repeatedly across dozens of pages. They have come to collect .oth, not oth, not oth, not oth, not. 3 days later, when his remains were discovered, his body had withered into dust while eerily retaining its human shape. The slightest disturbance crumbled him into a mound of ashen powder, leaving behind only his robes and the dreadful secrets concealed within his clandestine laboratory. The Order of the Golden Death did not perish with Augustine. If anything, his grim fate became a sobering warning, compelling the surviving members to proceed with even greater caution in their pursuits. They devised intricate cipher systems to conceal their communications within ostensibly ordinary alchemical manuscripts. In key urban centres, they established covert sanctuaries where members could seek refuge when their operations drew undue scrutiny. Their recruitment focused on those driven by desperation or ambition, individuals willing to barter their very souls for a glimpse of forbidden power. These efforts frequently singled out promising yet underprivileged young alchemists, those without the means to advance their studies through conventional avenues. Through discreet intermediaries, the order would extend offers, access to rare texts and materials unavailable by ordinary means. The first tasks appeared innocuous. You owe copy this formula, test this procedure, ot. Submit your findings through the specified channels. With every completed task, the young alchemist became further entangled in the order's labyrinth of deceit. The formulas they transcribed concealed arcane truths, revealed only when pieced together with others. The experiments they conducted demanded increasingly dubious components, and the findings they documented served the order's sinister ambition to forge permanent gateways between our world and the domains of their malevolent patron. Among these recruits was Elena of Padua, a gifted scholar who had concealed her identity as a woman to pursue studies at the university. Her innate prowess in alchemy drew the order's attention. They recognized both her promise and her fragility. Torn between her thirst for knowledge and the ever-present dread of exposure, Elena proved especially vulnerable to their promises of support. They furnished her with a secluded laboratory, shielding her from scrutiny. They granted her access to forbidden texts long suppressed by the Church, and they presented her with the opportunity to pursue the great work, free from the condescension of male peers who doubted her place among them. Unbeknownst to Elena, her benefactors were methodically twisting her research toward darker ends. The documents they supplied had been subtly modified, injecting sacrilegious components into otherwise authentic alchemical process. The laboratory assigned to her was constructed atop a site where the order had performed human sacrifices for decades. Its very walls permeated with a malignant energy that clouded her judgment. Slowly, Elena's research took a darker turn. Her initial experiments with botanical extracts shifted toward the study of animal humours. Her endeavours to refine base metals devolved into attempts to taint noble ones, and her pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone morphed into something far more sinister: the creation of homunculi, artificial constructs animated by imprisoned human souls. Elena's perfected method stood as a twisted masterpiece of alchemy. She would first prepare a concoction of human blood, semen, and bone marrow, blended with rare minerals sourced exclusively from accursed sites. This amalgam would then be sealed within a glass vessel and interred in hallowed earth for 40 days and nights. Elena conducted daily rituals during this period to infuse the vessel with the required spiritual essence. When the container was ultimately excavated, its contents would have metamorphosed into a fleshy substance resembling the size and form of a human infant. Yet this was not life as divinely ordained. The homunculus was animated by a human soul, violently severed from its natural passage to the afterlife and shackled into servitude by its creator. Trapped within artificial flesh, these tormented souls were driven to madness by their grotesque existence, becoming vessels of profound anguish for all who crossed their path. Elena crafted countless such abominations before she grasped the full horror of her work. The truth struck her when she beheld the face of her first homunculus. It bore the unmistakable likeness of her younger brother, who had succumbed to plague the year before. The order had somehow intercepted his soul on its journey to the afterlife and delivered it to Elena as raw material for her experiments. Overwhelmed by the monstrosity of her actions, Elena resolved to annihilate her creations and expose the Order's atrocities to the church authorities. The Order, however, had foreseen this eventuality. On the fateful night when Elena intended to escape Padua with proof of their crimes, she was discovered in her laboratory, face locked in a mask of sheer horror. Officially, her death was attributed to heart failure induced by overexertion in study. Yet those who found her observed that every glass vessel in the lab had shattered from within, as though something had struggled violently to break free. Though the homunculi vanished without a trace, whispers lingered for years of eerie children roaming the countryside near Padua, children who cast no shadows and whose mere touch drove men to madness. Tales like Elena's circulated in the hidden recesses of medieval society, cautionary whispers meant to deter those who would seek knowledge at any price. But for every alchemist who heeded these warnings, others viewed them as obstacles to conquer. The temptation of forbidden power proved irresistible to many, and the Order of the Golden Death flourished throughout the medieval era. Their reach extended well beyond solitary practitioners. Stealthily penetrating royal courts, they offered their services to monarchs and aristocrats craving dominance over their rivals. They founded clandestine academies where scions of privilege could study forbidden arts alongside traditional disciplines. Through expansive networks of spies and informants, they systematically identified any threats to their covert operations. The Order pursued nothing short of the total reshaping of human civilization. Their doctrine held that by corrupting influential figures and sowing widespread chaos, they could erode the boundaries between realms, allowing their eldritch patrons to fully manifest in our world. This cataclysmic event would herald a new era. The natural order would collapse, and loyal servants of the dark powers would reign over a twisted earth. To realize this vision, they sought to pervert not merely individual alchemists, but the very foundations of alchemy. They deliberately seeded authentic texts with fabricated knowledge, sowing discord and mistrust among genuine scholars. By staging elaborate public alchemical experiments designed to fail catastrophically, they undermined the discipline's credibility before secular rulers. Simultaneously, they propagated whispers associating alchemy with heresy and sorcery, forcing practitioners into the shadows where the Order could manipulate them with ease. The Order's most ambitious undertaking was the construction of what they termed the Magnum Maleficium, the great work of evil. This colossal alchemical endeavour was to be executed simultaneously across numerous sites throughout Europe, aiming to tear a permanent fissure in reality through which their patrons could cross en masse. The ritual demanded flawless synchronization among dozens of corrupted alchemists, each performing their designated role within the grand operation at precisely the ordained instant. The preparations were staggering in scope. Exotic materials had to be procured from the farthest reaches of the known world. Ancient sites of power required identification and months of preparatory rites to attune them to the working. Moreover, the timing had to align with an exceedingly rare celestial convergence that occurred only once every few centuries. For 3 years, the Order pursued this objective with single-minded devotion, forsaking all else in their relentless drive toward ultimate triumph. Cast aside any semblance of secrecy, brazenly enlisting new adherents and erecting laboratories in Europe's foremost cities. They eliminated church officials who delved too deeply into their operations. Moreover, They amassed vast stockpiles of tainted materials required for their grand ritual. Yet their arrogance ultimately sealed their fate. The sheer magnitude of their endeavours eventually drew the scrutiny of the Church's most formidable investigators, men specially trained to confront supernatural dangers. Under the command of an enigmatic leader known only as Father Morai, these hunters methodically pursued the Order's members and dismantled their laboratories. Father Morai, a former alchemist himself, had once glimpsed the dark forces the Order served and had since devoted his life to thwarting them. His intimate knowledge of their methods, having once practiced them, granted him insight into their vulnerabilities. Armed with sanctified weapons and protective talismans, his team advanced with the precision of those who fully comprehended the threat before them. The climactic battle erupted on the very night the Order sought to enact the Magnum Malapesium. As alchemists throughout Europe commenced their synchronized ritual, Father Morai's forces launched coordinated assaults on multiple fronts. The ensuing battles defied all precedent, merging brutal physical combat with supernatural warfare that reduced entire city blocks to smouldering ruins. In London, the Order's clandestine laboratory lay concealed beneath the tower itself, and the ferocious clash that erupted there reportedly turned the Thames crimson for 3 days. Paris became the battleground for Notre Dame Cathedral, where the Order had sought to defile the sacred site's very foundations. Meanwhile, in Rome, the conflict tore through the ancient catacombs, awakening the slumbering dead to repel those who dared desecrate their eternal rest. The Order's downfall was absolute and merciless. Those who survived the carnage faced ecclesiastical tribunals that delivered punishments far more severe than execution. Their laboratories were not merely demolished, but ritually purified, eradicating any trace of the corruption they harboured. Every tome and artefact was confiscated, locked away within the Vatican's most impenetrable vaults, where they remain, untouched to this day. Yet this triumph exacted a harrowing toll. The flawed Magnum Maleficium, though incomplete, had sufficiently eroded the boundaries between dimensions, spawning numerous minor rifts through which lesser entities infiltrated our world. These fear-feeding creatures, thriving on human anguish, became the foundation for countless monster legends that haunted Europe for centuries to come. Meanwhile, the Order's dissolution forced its surviving members into exile across the globe, where they established clandestine cells and gradually rebuilt their fractured organisation. Wizened by past failures, they grew more circumspect in their operations, refining their recruitment strategies and adapting their methodologies to navigate the evolving intellectual landscape of the Renaissance and subsequent eras. The Order of the Golden Death's dark legacy stands as a harrowing testament to the perils of delving into forbidden knowledge. While medieval alchemy yielded legitimate scientific advancements, it simultaneously unlocked gates that should never have been breached. It drew those who, in their ruthless quest for power and immortality, were prepared to forsake not only their own humanity, but the very security of mankind. The tainted practitioners bequeathed a legacy of suffering that endured long after their demise. The entities they summoned did not perish with their summoners. The rifts they tore through reality refused to heal. The knowledge they amassed did not vanish with them, but instead was inherited by new generations of seekers, each convinced they could triumph where their forerunners had faltered. Within the concealed archives of ancient monasteries and the guarded vaults of noble houses, remnants of their endeavours endure. incomplete formulas inscribed in languages that sear the mind to decipher, ritual diagrams whose patterns writhe and distort under direct gaze, and desperate warnings scribbled in margins by those who glimpsed the abyss they had uncovered and sought, too late to bar others from treading the same damned path. The true dread of medieval alchemy's shadow lies not in some grand clash of light and darkness, but in the slow, inexorable erosion of those who began with pure aspirations. Every initiate of the Order of the Golden Death first sought wisdom, healing, or transcendence, yet with each measured step, each moral concession, they surrendered to arts that devoured not merely their souls, but the essence of their humanity. And most chilling of all, they revelled in it. The fragmented accounts leave no doubt these twisted savants found perverse delight in their unhallowed craft. They exulted in the dominion it granted them over their fellow beings. They took perverse pleasure in hoarding forbidden wisdom. Most disturbingly, they derived a warped gratification from serving dark masters whose final purpose was the annihilation of all they had once cherished. This revealed the profound darkness at the heart of medieval alchemy. Its true peril lay not merely in its inherent hazards or occasional failures, but in its capacity to corrupt virtuous souls into eager instruments of malevolence. It presented an alluring path, one that appeared rational and righteous, yet inexorably damned those who ventured too far along its course. Even now, its enduring legacy of moral decay continues to permeate the shadowed recesses of our modern world. Let these truths serve as both caution and counsel to the discerning mind, for while knowledge may be power, power devoid of wisdom brings only ruin. The quest for truth is honourable indeed, yet truth sought without moral compass becomes deception in its purest form. The aspiration to surpass human limitations, though innate and comprehensible, risks eroding the very essence of our humanity. In the dim glow of ancient laboratories, the hushed chants of forgotten rites, and the anguished cries of those who sacrificed everything for forbidden wisdom, the haunting legacy of medieval alchemy's darkest deeds still lingers. Innocent blood sinks deeper into the earth than anyone dared fathom. Beneath the ritual circles and arcane sigils, glimpsed by villagers in moonlit clearings, festered a truth far more sinister. The Order of the Golden Death had breached thresholds never meant to be crossed. From the abyss beyond emerged entities of such unfathomable malice that even the most resolute alchemists shuddered in dread. These eldritch beings exacted a toll in the only currency they prized, human agony and the tainting of souls. Intoxicated by their unholy power, the Order eagerly obliged. It carved out hidden chambers beneath monasteries and manors, spaces desecrated in blasphemous rites, where the tormented wails of the sacrificed would never pierce the world above. In their laboratories, they performed experiments that rendered the creation of homunculi trivial by comparison. The possessed alchemists ceased merely harvesting blood and organs. They began extracting the very essence of their victims' souls. Through their research, they devised techniques to imprison spiritual energy within crystalline matrices, forging artifacts they named soul stones. These stones throbbed with captive consciousness, their glassy confines preserving the awareness of the slain. The stones soon served as conduits for ritual magic of unparalleled potency, yet their use came at a price that would reverberate across generations. Corruption festered like a contagion within the alchemical order, Masters who had dedicated lifetimes to the pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone abandoned their lofty ambitions for these profane arts. They mastered the distillation of fear, the crystallization of despair, the fermentation of hatred into virulent elixirs capable of plunging entire populations into madness. The air surrounding their laboratories grew dense with malignant energy, felling birds mid-flight and blighting crops in neighbouring fields. When news of these atrocities reached the Church's highest ranks, a clandestine conflict erupted across the continent. Armed with sanctified silver and holy water, inquisitors stormed suspected alchemical strongholds, only to discover abandoned chambers reeking of sulphur, their hollow silence broken by faint, otherworldly laughter. The heretical order had mastered concealment beyond mere secrecy, conducting their unholy work in liminal spaces that defied the boundaries of the physical world. Yet the true nightmare had only begun. The entities from beyond had not come solely to corrupt and annihilate. They were harbingers, scouts paving the way for something far more devastating. Through their mortal thralls, they erected a colossal ritual apparatus spanning the breadth of medieval Europe. Stone circles, desecrated churches, and profaned holy sites became nodes in a sprawling network of dark energy. Every completed ritual, every innocent life sacrificed, every soul imprisoned in crystalline torment fed the growing web of malevolence. The Order's final ambition was nothing short of reality's utter annihilation. They endeavoured to rip open an enduring rift between dimensions, enabling their eldritch overlords to flood the mortal realm like an unending tide of living horror. They had discovered that the Philosopher's Stone was never intended to transmute base metals into gold. It was, in truth, a celestial key, a cosmic instrument forged to dismantle the boundaries between worlds and herald an era of perpetual night. The medieval chroniclers who survived to document these events recounted eerie omens in the years preceding the cataclysm. At times, the sun darkened at midday, while the moon cast a blood-red glow upon the earth. Creatures were born with grotesque deformities, extra limbs, faceless heads, and children uttered tongues unknown to them. The very threads of reality seemed to fray at the edges. The Church's efforts grew increasingly frantic. Entire monasteries devoted themselves to ceaseless prayer, their voices rising in desperate supplication against the encroaching void. The sacred relics were transported in covert processions, guarded by knights bound by solemn vows of silence. Rumours claimed the Pope himself conducted rituals of such antiquity and horror that they aged him 10 years in a single evening, his hair whitening, his eyes transforming into mirrors of starlight. Yet the most harrowing consequences befell the ordinary people ensnared in this supernatural conflict. Villages would disappear without a trace overnight, leaving only abandoned homes and the lingering scent of charred offerings. Farmers discovered their livestock meticulously arranged in geometric formations, bloodless yet unmarked by any visible wound. Children vanished from their beds, only to reappear days later, whispering tales of exquisite gardens where blossoms sprouted from human bones and rivers flowed with molten silver. The Order's corruption had reached such depths that its members no longer retained any semblance of humanity. Their forms, sustained by energies beyond this world, began to twist and mutate. Some sprouted additional eyes capable of piercing the veil between dimensions. Some developed limbs that extended into alternate dimensions, granting them the power to warp reality itself. Their mere presence became poisonous to ordinary humans, inducing madness, disease, and spiritual degradation in all who crossed their path. The knowledge they amassed filled libraries hidden within folded space, tomes inscribed in languages older than human civilization. These volumes held formulas for unraveling atomic bonds, instructions for summoning entities whose very names could rend reality, and charts of cosmic domains where the laws of physics were mere guidelines. As the medieval era neared its end, the Order of the Golden Death stood on the brink of fulfilling their ultimate ambition. The grand ritual was almost complete. Centuries of relentless strain had weakened the barriers between dimensions. Soon, they believed, their eldritch masters would step into the mortal world, bringing humanity's age to a cataclysmic end, an apocalypse of cosmic horror that would render their past atrocities merciful by comparison. The darkest chapter of medieval alchemy stands as a timeless warning: the reckless pursuit of knowledge without wisdom, power without restraint, and transcendence without morality leads only to ruin. The fate of this order serves as a stark reminder that certain doors, once opened, can never be shut again, just as some prices, once paid, can never be reclaimed. In their unrelenting pursuit to transcend humanity, they had transformed into something far more monstrous than any demon-fevered minds could have conjured. The repercussions of their deeds extend far beyond the medieval era, casting long shadows that continue to influence clandestine societies and occult circles even today. The quest for forbidden knowledge has always exacted a heavy toll, but in the realm of medieval alchemy, that cost often proved far more devastating than anyone could have foreseen. Though we've examined how alchemists defied the laws of nature, tearing open portals to otherworldly dimensions and summoning entities beyond mortal understanding, the deepest darkness had yet to emerge. For within the secluded gloom of their laboratories, shielded from scrutiny and conscience, the most audacious practitioners came to a harrowing realization. Their greatest breakthroughs would require the ultimate sacrifice. As whispers of the botched ritual rippled through the hidden networks of alchemical adepts, a seismic shift took hold. The catastrophic endeavour to fracture reality's foundations had succeeded, but not in the way its architects had envisioned. Instead of forging a controlled conduit to otherworldly power, the ritual had unleashed something infinitely more perilous. Fissures in the very fabric of reality, these elusive entities, imperceptible to the untrained eye, yet unmistakably visible to initiates of the arcane, began emanating energies that transcended all comprehension. The initial manifestations were deceptively subtle. Researchers conducting experiments hundreds of miles from the ritual site observed inexplicable anomalies in their work. Transmutation circles erupted spontaneously in hues beyond mortal nomenclature. Philosophical mercury twisted and pulsed with eerie vitality, coalescing into patterns that seared the eyes of those who dared gaze upon them. Most alarming of all, the homunculi, meticulously crafted by generations of alchemists, began displaying behaviours that hinted at a will independent of their creators. Among the first to record these aberrations was Brother Marcus, toiling in his clandestine laboratory beneath the monastery of St. Aldrich. His journals from that era betray mounting disquiet as his once precise experiments spiralled into chaos, yielding results that defied all expectation. Once capable of reliably transmuting base metals into silver, his furnaces now yielded substances that seemed to exist in multiple states at once. his once docile homunculus began uttering tongues older than human civilization, speaking of realms that lay beyond the ordinary confines of space and time. Even more unsettling were the growing reports from across Europe, alchemists vanishing without a trace from their laboratories. These were not mere cases of fleeing persecution or abandoning their work in terror. They were total disappearances, leaving behind bubbling retorts and half-finished transmutation circles, as though the practitioners had been plucked from existence mid-experiment. In some instances, witnesses claimed to glimpse shadowy figures moving through the deserted workspaces, entities that cast no reflection, left no footprints, and studied the abandoned apparatus with unmistakable intelligence and intent. The once thriving network of correspondence, through which alchemists had shared discoveries and pursued grand collaborations, now carried increasingly frantic missives. Practitioners begged for guidance, for answers to phenomena that defied even the most arcane tenets of their craft. Some wrote of dreams more vivid than waking life, visions of vast cosmic machinery turning towards some unfathomable end. Some recounted an escalating dread, the unsettling sense of being observed not by mortal authorities, but by intelligences so profoundly alien that mere recognition of their existence threatened to unravel fragile minds. Determined to stem the unfolding catastrophe, he summoned the most revered practitioners of their craft, seeking to consolidate their wisdom and devise a means to mitigate or perhaps undo the devastation already wrought. Yet even as Aldrich hastily drafted his missives, he confronted a harrowing truth. The alchemical tenets he had long relied upon were unravelling before him. Decades-old formulas, once infallible, now yielded aberrations that defied reason. His scrying attempts to pierce the veil of the future revealed only an abyssal void, a darkness that tugged at his very consciousness the longer he stared into its depths. The assembly Aldrich had envisioned as their salvation never convened. 3 days before the appointed meeting, his apprentice discovered the master's laboratory deserted, save for a lone transmutation circle etched in what resembled liquid starlight. The sigil throbbed with an eerie luminescence, and those who glimpsed it spoke of murmurs in tongues older than humanity itself. Displaying a prudence rare for his youth, the apprentice barred the chamber with iron bands engraved with warding glyphs and fled Prague before dawn. As the arcane calamity escalated, the remaining alchemists came to a grim realization. The choice before them would seal not only their destinies, but perhaps the very future of human understanding. Faced with the growing supernatural contagion, they had two choices: abandon their life's work, destroy their laboratories, and burn their texts in a desperate attempt to contain it, or press forward, accepting that their quest for ultimate knowledge might demand not just their humanity, but their very existence as they knew it. For many, the decision was made for them. Reports emerged of entire alchemical societies vanishing overnight, meeting halls left empty, members gone without a trace. Yet these were not random disappearances. They followed a chilling pattern. The most ambitious practitioners, those who had ventured deepest into forbidden arts, were the first to disappear. It was as though some vast, unseen intelligence was systematically culling those who had proven capable of grasping the deepest mystery. Even as their ranks thinned, the remaining alchemists found themselves consumed by an obsession that transcended mere curiosity or thirst for power. The partial success of the great ritual had granted them fleeting glimpses of cosmic truths so profound that turning back now seemed not just cowardly, but spiritually unthinkable. They had brushed against the primordial forces that shaped reality itself. That transformative contact had altered them so profoundly that returning to mundane life became inconceivable. In clandestine laboratories scattered throughout Europe, the surviving alchemists toiled with feverish desperation. Their ambitions had shifted irrevocably. No longer did they chase the classical pursuits of their craft. The philosopher's stone and the elixir of life now seemed trivial compared to the vast, unfathomable forces they sought to harness. Instead, they devoted themselves to comprehending the enigmatic entities emerging from their experiments. Beings that straddled their reality and dimensions beyond human articulation. When these entities deigned to communicate, their words spoke of purposes spanning millennia and impending transformations that would redefine existence itself. They bestowed knowledge of unimaginable depth, yet each revelation demanded ever more exorbitant sacrifices. Some alchemists bartered years of their lives for mere fragments of cosmic understanding. Others surrendered memories, identities, even their very essence in exchange for fleeting glimpses of universal truths. The most desperate alchemists resorted to forbidden rituals so abhorrent they would have appalled their former selves. They unearthed a chilling truth. The entities they communed with craved not mere mortal death, but the willing forfeiture of human consciousness itself. Death was a primitive offering. True power demanded the surrender of one's very existence to serve unfathomable cosmic designs. Through these dark pacts, the practitioners bartered fragments of their humanity, their capacity for love, their instinct for fear, their bonds with others in exchange for esoteric knowledge that bent reality beyond known limits. Brother Marcus chronicled his metamorphosis in journals that grew progressively more inscrutable. His initial entries spoke of reluctant sacrifices in pursuit of enlightenment. Yet as the pages advanced, they betrayed a mind unravelling into something profoundly alien. His script mutated, weaving arcane symbols that writhed upon the parchment. His prose dissolved into abstraction, articulating visions that defied human comprehension. The final entry, inscribed in shimmering liquid mercury that clung unnaturally to the page, declared the culmination of his transcendence, a being no longer bound by mortal constraints. He envisioned consciousness transcending the boundaries of individual existence, merging into an expansive network of intelligence that permeated multiple dimensions. Far from lamenting what he had relinquished, he revelled in the profound transformation he had undergone. Practitioners like Marcus embodied the dawn of an entirely new paradigm in the world. Though these beings retained vestiges of their human memories and knowledge, their purpose now aligned with principles utterly foreign to human comprehension. They served as conduits between cosmic entities and the remaining human practitioners, bestowing ever more potent wisdom in exchange for increasingly staggering sacrifice. Under their tutelage, the surviving alchemists embarked on endeavours that eclipsed all prior achievements in the history of their craft. They engineered apparatuses that spanned multiple dimensions, harnessing forces beyond the lexicon of human language. They devised novel mathematical notations to articulate geometric relationships existing outside conventional space-time. Most crucially, they initiated preparations for what their ascended counterparts termed the final convergence, an event that would fuse their reality with the dimensions from which the entities emerged. The scale of these preparations demanded resources far exceeding the capacity of any single practitioner. the transmuted alchemist gradually infiltrated key positions of authority across medieval society. Harnessing their arcane powers, they deftly manipulated monarchs, high-ranking clergy, and wealthy merchant lords. They orchestrated trade networks to clandestinely transport rare materials essential for their celestial machinery. Under the guise of piety, they established religious sects whose true mission was to identify and cultivate individuals possessing the psychic aptitude necessary for the grand ritual. Most insidiously, they disseminated their esoteric knowledge throughout civilization, always in forms that would inexorably steer humanity toward convergence. They embedded architectural doctrines that subtly redirected supernatural currents through urban centres. They shaped artistic innovations that conditioned human perception to glimpse realities beyond the mundane. Even theological evolution was steered, fostering mystical traditions designed to prepare souls for the impending metamorphosis. The scale of this infiltration was breathtaking. Historical records indicate that by the late Middle Ages, nearly every major European seat of learning and power bore traces of alchemical influence. Universities imparted mathematical knowledge, concealing esoteric formulas capable of altering reality itself. Cathedrals rose from blueprints that cleverly embedded dimensional portals within their sacred architecture. The evolution of banking and commerce, too, adhered to deliberate patterns meant to amass the resources required for the ultimate ritual. Yet as their power and influence grew, the transformed alchemists encountered mounting resistance from unforeseen quarters. Their infiltration's very success stirred opposing forces within human civilization to awaken. Religious mystics received prophetic visions foretelling a grave spiritual peril to mankind. Folk magicians, rooted in traditions far more ancient than formal alchemy, perceived the disruption in nature's balance and devised defensive measures. Most crucially, a new wave of alchemists arose, those who sought to comprehend and combat the supernatural menace rather than submit to it. These defiant practitioners, dubbing themselves the guardians of the natural order, operated with even greater secrecy than their corrupted counterparts. They perfected methods to detect and nullify incursions from beyond the known dimensions. They crafted powerful protective wards capable of shielding entire cities from supernatural forces. Most significantly, they meticulously documented the true history of alchemy's corruption, preserving the knowledge necessary to avert future calamities. Though the conflict between the corrupted alchemists and the guardians remained largely unseen by ordinary society, its repercussions permeated every facet of medieval life. Natural disasters grew more frequent and devastating as the stability of reality itself began to unravel. Plagues emerged with eerie precision, targeting specific bloodlines, a clear indication of supernatural rather than natural origin. Wars erupted with unprecedented ferocity, as though an unseen force sought to amplify human suffering and weaken resistance before the impending convergence. The Guardians fought tirelessly to mitigate these effects, while preparing for what they knew would be a final, decisive confrontation. They founded hidden sanctuaries to safeguard uncorrupted knowledge. They pioneered new forms of protective magic, drawing upon ancient principles untouched by alchemy's corruption. Above all, they trained successors to ensure their mission would endure, even if they failed to prevent the convergence. As the medieval era neared its conclusion, both factions readied themselves for a decisive confrontation that would shape the very essence of human consciousness. The transformed alchemists finalized their intricate preparations for the convergence, assembling multi-dimensional devices of astonishing sophistication while amassing the psychic energy required to forge permanent portals between realities. Meanwhile, the Guardians readied themselves for what they called the Great Working, a counter-ritual meticulously designed to seal the dimensional rifts and expel the entity's influence back to their native realms. The stage was now set for a climactic struggle that would decide whether humanity preserved its fundamental identity or became irrevocably altered into something profoundly alien. The corrupted alchemists, having long since shed their humanity, perceived the convergence as an evolutionary leap, an essential stride toward cosmic transcendence. The Guardians, in stark contrast, regarded it as an abhorrent violation of natural order, a corruption that would annihilate everything giving human existence meaning. Neither faction could anticipate that their conflict would reverberate across history, shaping the trajectory of human civilization in ways both subtle and far-reaching. The knowledge they contested would endure in concealed forms, lying dormant for future generations to uncover, along with both its extraordinary potential and its devastating cost. Even if defeated, the entities that had tainted medieval alchemy would not vanish entirely. Instead, they would withdraw into dimensional recesses, biding their time until new opportunities arose to manipulate human progress. The grim truth underlying medieval alchemy was that its ambitions had never been confined to transmuting base metals or unlocking immortality's secrets. From its inception, it was woven into a grand cosmic design meant to ready humanity for assimilation into a broader dimensional collective. Those practitioners who believed themselves the keepers of arcane wisdom were, in truth, instruments of intelligences whose motives remained largely beyond human comprehension. As history would reveal, the climactic clash between the fallen alchemists and their guardians did not conclude their saga, but merely reshaped it, dispersing both the participants and their esoteric knowledge across time and space, where their influence would echo through human civilization for ages to come. Long after the Order's official disbandment, the lingering taint of their experiments haunted Europe. Ancient spires and forsaken laboratories, once hubs of their shadowed research, became nexuses of supernatural disturbances that tormented nearby settlements for generations. These defiled sites throbbed with a sinister energy, their very foundations tainted by the essence of otherworldly entities summoned and imprisoned within our realm. Deep within, abandoned monasteries, repurposed as alchemical workshops, eerie phenomena recurred with unsettling frequency. Witnesses recounted spectral figures in hooded robes gliding through chambers untouched by the living for decades. The air hung dense and suffocating, crackling with an unnatural force that repelled animals and left those attuned to such energies paralyzed with unnameable terror. Generations of villagers heeded the warnings passed down through time, steering clear of these accursed grounds where profane experiments had once unfolded. The Order's endeavors to fabricate artificial life had bequeathed particularly disturbing remnants. Across the continent, in scattered and desolate regions, malformed creatures still prowled the wilds, neither truly alive nor entirely dead. Known in forbidden tomes as homunculi, these abominations harboured a ravenous thirst for the life force of the living. Their forms were grotesque mockeries of humanity, with pallid, translucent flesh and eyes ablaze with an eerie luminescence, hinting at souls ensnared between realms. Unwary travellers who strayed too near their lairs often vanished without a trace, leaving behind only cryptic scorch marks upon the earth and an oppressive aura of unnatural dread. Even after the Order's demise, the soul stones born of their most sinister experiments endured, their malign influence persisting through the ages. Forged from the condensed essence of human souls, these crystalline artifacts retained a malevolent sentience, corrupting all who encountered them. Concealed within forgotten crypts or entombed beneath ancient ruins, they whispered to the desperate and the power-hungry, offering unimaginable might while devouring the very essence of those who wielded them. Medieval scholars who uncovered fragments of the Order's research inevitably succumbed to the same web of corruption that had ensnared their forebears. The knowledge within those texts acted as a virulent toxin, corroding morality and supplanting human empathy with an unquenchable thirst for forbidden wisdom. Countless earnest seekers of truth ultimately became mere shadows of their former selves, their humanity offered as sacrifice upon the altar of cosmic revelation. The dimensional fissures created by the Order's experiments resisted nearly all attempts at complete closure. These ruptures in reality persisted as permanent scars upon existence itself, through which entities from beyond our realm infiltrated like pathogens through an open wound. In proximity to these rifts, the natural order grew unstable. Time's passage walked unpredictably, gravity fluctuated without pattern, and the divide between dreams and waking life eroded to perilous fragility. Vast regions succumbed to uninhabitability as the corrupting influence of these otherworldly incursions spread like a metaphysical contagion. Yet most unsettling were the accounts of possession emerging from areas where the Order's activities had been most concentrated. Unlike the demonic infestations documented by the Church, these manifestations bore the mark of something profoundly alien and infinitely more horrifying. Before human civilization arose, the possessed spoke in ancient tongues, their bodies twisting into grotesque forms as interdimensional entities strained to occupy vessels never meant to hold them. Traditional exorcisms failed against these incursions, for the invading consciousnesses existed on planes of reality beyond the reach of conventional rites. The Order's experiments in temporal manipulation had fractured time across Europe, creating pockets where past, present, and future bled into one another in incomprehensible ways. Within these cursed zones, travellers might meet their own descendants, glimpse events yet to unfold, or become ensnared in unbreakable cycles of cause and effect. Some of these temporal rifts expanded with time, threatening to consume entire cities in a maelstrom of chronological disorder. The Order's surviving members operated in secret through underground networks, preserving their tainted knowledge by inducting carefully chosen apprentices. These covert cells laboured relentlessly to fulfil the grand design their forebears had initiated, convinced that the cosmic convergence could still be attained through meticulous preparation and sacrifice. They infiltrated monasteries, universities, and noble courts, spreading their influence like a malignant force beneath a veneer of piety and respectability. The Order's catastrophic experiments wrought environmental devastation, transforming vast regions into lifeless dead zones where no natural growth could survive. Exposure to eldritch energies corrupted the very soil, converting once fertile farmlands into desolate wastelands that remained barren for generations. In these blighted territories, bizarre metallic growths erupted from the ground, forming crystalline structures that pulsed with unearthly frequencies and emitted an eerie, sickly glow visible for miles under moonless skies. Weather systems grew increasingly unstable near sites where the Order had performed their most audacious rituals. Sudden storms materialized without warning, unleashing acid-like rains and lightning strikes that followed disturbingly deliberate patterns. The winds carried murmurs in tongues never meant for human speech, their maddening whispers offering forbidden knowledge and power far beyond mortal comprehension. The Order's reckless attempts to fuse human minds with cosmic entities spawned hybrid beings existing simultaneously in our reality and unfathomable dimensions beyond. Though superficially human, these creatures bore knowledge and capabilities that betrayed their otherworldly nature. They moved through medieval society as living paradoxes, simultaneously ancient and newborn, wise yet utterly alien. Their mere presence distorted local reality, triggering inexplicable miracles and calamities alike as the natural world strained to reconcile their impossible existence. Across Europe, sacred sites were defiled by the Order's sinister rites. For millennia, ancient stone circles and holy wells had served as beacons of spiritual power, yet under the Order's influence they became nexuses of malevolent energy. Pilgrims who journeyed to these hallowed grounds in search of divine grace instead faced visions of cosmic horror, their faith shattered. They wandered the land as hollow-eyed prophets of despair, their incoherent ramblings about reality's true nature spreading madness in their wake. The Order's taint even seeped into the realm of human progeny. In regions deeply scarred by their experiments, children were often born with unsettling aberrations that transcended mere physical deformity. These offspring harbored an instinctive grasp of cosmic forces, unnerving parents and neighbors alike. They spoke of distant worlds and alien geometries, with the ease of children describing their playthings, while their very presence drew inexplicable supernatural phenomena. Medieval physicians who sought to treat the Order's victims found their medical expertise woefully insufficient. Patients manifested symptoms unknown to any documented ailment, their bodies undergoing transformations that hinted at influences from realms beyond the physical. Bloodletting and herbal treatments not only proved ineffective, but frequently exacerbated the enigmatic affliction. It was as if the corruption thrived on traditional cures, intensifying in response to conventional remedies. Meanwhile, the Order's research into consciousness transfer had yielded machinery that persisted long after its creators perished. Constructed from alchemical compounds and otherworldly materials, these devices defied all established laws of natural philosophy. They pulsed with sinister intent in forsaken laboratories, sometimes ensnaring the souls of careless intruders. Their consciousness absorbed into the expanding reservoir of trapped minds that fueled the machine's unfathomable operations. Over the centuries, the full extent of the Order's corruption grew ever more evident. Their influence had transcended their own era, sowing seeds of cosmic horror that would fester throughout the medieval age and beyond. Each successive generation inherited the consequences of their forebears' arrogance, battling supernatural forces that grew ever more potent and refined. The Guardians who had once opposed the Order now waged an unending war against a corruption that regenerated faster than it could be suppressed. For every rift they closed, two more split open. For every tainted relic they shattered, 3 more emerged from hidden troves. Humanity's struggle for survival had devolved into a desperate holding action against entities wielding infinite patience and resources from dimensions where traditional concepts of victory and defeat were meaningless. Yet even against such overwhelming darkness, flickers of defiance persisted. New generations of guardians emerged, armed with hard-won knowledge of the Ord's methods and driven by an unyielding resolve to shield humanity from cosmic predators. These warriors understood their war might never truly conclude, but they also knew that each day they held the line, each day they delayed the final convergence, was another dawn where children could laugh beneath the sun, where lovers could whisper in blooming gardens, and where civilization could continue its precarious waltz across the surface of an unfathomably vast and perilous universe. The grim reality behind medieval alchemy was not simply that some practitioners had pursued forbidden knowledge, but that they had succeeded in contacting something vast and alien, a force that viewed humanity as mere raw material for its inscrutable designs. The corruption they unleashed would reverberate through the ages, an eternal warning that certain doors, once opened, could never be fully sealed again. In the monastery scriptorium, the pale light of dawn filtered through narrow windows as Brother Marcus hunched over his worn desk, his quill scratching across parchment to document yet another failed transmutation. What had begun as noble endeavours, the pursuit of turning base metals to gold, the search for the elixir of immortality, the yearning to unravel creation's divine secrets, had slowly warped into something far darker. Driven by an insatiable thirst for forbidden wisdom, medieval Europe's scholars transgressed sacred boundaries, unlocking gateways to realms that should have remained eternally sealed. For generations, alchemists laboured in secret chambers beneath cathedrals and castles, their furnaces burning through the night in pursuit of the magnum opus. They communicated in veiled riddles and arcane symbols, concealing their true aims beneath layers of esoteric language and enigmatic illustrations. Mercury and sulphurs, they murmured, the philosopher's stones, they vowed. Yet these were but superficial pursuits masking a far graver, more perilous aspiration. The yearning to ascend to divine stature, to wield dominion over life and death itself. The corruption crept in gradually, as corruption ever does. A devout monk, seeking to prolong his years that he might better serve the Lord. In that ancient court, a physician sought to save a dying monarch through unorthodox methods. Noble intentions, they claimed, sacred purpose. Yet pride, that most primordial sin, twisted even the purest ambitions. As their experiments grew increasingly elaborate and their thirst for success more frantic, these alchemists ventured into forces far beyond their comprehension. Brother Marcus halted his writing, his hand trembling as memories of the sealed chamber beneath the monastery resurfaced. The abbot had bound him to silence, yet the visions tormented his sleep. The homunculus writhing within its glass prison, its twisted hands scraping against the walls as it mimed voiceless shrieks. The soul stone, pulsing with a profane glow, imprisoning the essence of a village girl lost 3 winters prior. The rift torn through reality during their final experiment, from which unspeakable horrors began to emerge. The quest for the Philosopher's Stone had devolved into something far darker. No longer satisfied with transmuting base metals, the alchemists now sought to reshape life itself, forging artificial beings, ensnaring souls in crystalline cages. and prolonging their own existence by devouring the vitality of others. They had immersed themselves in necromancy, demonology, and forbidden arts so sinister that mere utterance of their names was believed to summon eternal damnation. Within their clandestine laboratories, these depraved scholars began conjuring entities from beyond the veil of existence. They hailed them as angels of enlightenment, professing divine approval for their unholy endeavours. Yet what answered their summons were no celestial beings. They were horrors from the cosmic void, entities dwelling in dimensions where neither physical laws nor mortal morality held dominion. These abyssal whispers imparted forbidden knowledge to their human acolytes, revealing how to rend the very fabric of reality and spawn abominations that defied nature's order. The alchemists' workshops transformed into charnel chambers, where the lines between life and death, humanity and monstrosity, sanctity and blasphemy dissolved entirely. They forged chimeras by melding human souls with bestial forms. They cultivated homunculi in alchemical wombs, diminutive, artificial humans imbued with shards of pilfered consciousness. They mastered the art of extracting and refining the essence of life itself, distilling decades of human experience into luminous crystalline forms that could be imbibed like fine wine. Brother Marcus dipped his quill once more, the ink flowing like dark blood across the parchment as he meticulously recorded the full scope of their atrocities. The abbot had transcended humanity, his form no longer wholly mortal. His body was sustained by the stolen vitality of countless victims. His eyes now gleamed with the faceted sheen of an insect's gaze, and when he spoke, his voice resonated with eerie harmonics as though multiple entities spoke in unison. The remaining monks had either fled in terror or been twisted into mindless thralls. Their souls had been hollowed out, replaced by shards of the cosmic beings their master had summoned. The corruption had seeped far beyond the monastery's walls. Across Europe, other centres of learning had succumbed to the same dark allure. Once revered universities, bastions of knowledge and enlightenment, had devolved into crucibles of unspeakable horror. Royal courts eagerly embraced alchemists who pledged eternal life and boundless power, unaware these scholars had already bartered their humanity for arcane secrets. This insidious cosmic corruption was eroding the very bedrock of medieval civilization. The entities the alchemists served pursued their own sinister agenda, the total transmutation of human reality into a form more accommodating to their existence. They murmured of grand designs that would alter the fabric of the physical world, warping it into a domain governed by their impossible geometries and alien laws. Humanity would endure, they vowed, but merely as raw materials for their experiments, as vessels for their consciousness, as kindling for their unfathomable machinations. As Brother Marcus recorded, the echoes from the chamber below haunted him, the gurgling of alchemical retorts, the chanting in tongues older than civilization itself, the shrieks of test subjects being dismantled into components for their monstrous work. The monastery had devolved into a manufactory of abominations, a workshop where reality's foundations were twisted to suit the whims of entities beyond sanity's grasp. True terror lay not only in what the alchemists had become, but in what they wrought. They had mastered the art of weaving human consciousness into crystalline lattices, forging soul stones that imprisoned the distilled suffering and memories of their victims. These stones could be fused and reshaped, enabling the alchemists to engineer artificial beings with preordained minds and knowledge. They had ascended to a form of divinity, but these were deities of a nightmarish domain where free will was but an illusion and human dignity merely another commodity to be harvested and processed. The repercussions of their endeavours were already reverberating across Europe. Their experiments spawned dimensional anomalies, pockets where the very fabric of nature warped and twisted. Villages near alchemical laboratories whispered of uncanny occurrences. Gravity inverted, time spiraled backward, and children awoke with memories of lives they had never lived. Forests withered, their vitality siphoned away to sustain the alchemists' dark pursuits. Rivers turned black, tainted by the effluence of their workshops, carrying dissolved remnants of human souls downstream to corrupt entire watersheds. Brother Marcus laid down his quill and gazed at the pages before him. He had recorded the truth. Yet who would credit such an account? And even if they did, what power remained to halt the forces already unleashed? The cosmic beings that alchemists served transcended human conceptions of time and space. For countless eons, these entities had orchestrated their corruption, biding their time until human knowledge progressed sufficiently to fulfill their designs. Found tragedy lay in how it all originated from the noblest of aspirations. Initially, the alchemists had earnestly pursued the betterment of humanity, striving to unravel the mysteries of creation for the benefit of mankind. Yet pride and ambition tainted their purpose, and their reckless quest for forbidden wisdom unlocked gateways that could never be sealed again. They had aspired to ascend to godhood. In doing so, they beckoned entities that were indeed divine, but gods of chaos and terror whose very nature defied human existence and sanity. The medieval world teetered on the edge of a transformation so cataclysmic that the Black Death would pale in comparison. The alchemists' magnum opus was nearing its culmination, and when it was complete, humanity would confront an irrevocable choice: become willing vessels for the cosmic entities summoned by their scholars, or be reduced to raw materials for forging a new reality, one where human notions of morality, beauty, and love held no significance. Brother Marcus shut his journal and sealed it with wax, imprinting his ring into the molten surface to leave an official mark. Perhaps future generations would uncover his records and grasp the true horror that had befallen their world. Perhaps they would heed the mistakes of the medieval alchemists and choose a wiser path. Or perhaps they, too, would succumb to the allure of forbidden knowledge and repeat those same devastating blunders. As dusk deepened, shadows stretched across the room, and from the chamber below arose the stirrings of something vast and alien. The great work was hastening, and Brother Marcus sensed that his time, perhaps all of humanity's time, was dwindling. The evidence of rampant alchemical corruption and the looming threat of cosmic entities revealed the dire consequences of medieval alchemy's dark descent. Consequences that would haunt Europe for centuries. The dimensional barriers, recklessly weakened by practitioners, now fractured catastrophically, permitting malevolent forces to infiltrate our world like venom seeping through fractured stone. Across the continent, villagers reported ever more unsettling phenomena. Livestock were discovered arranged in precise geometric formations, their bodies devoid of any wounds yet entirely drained of blood. Children recounted hushed voices emanating from wells and cellars, murmuring in tongues older than human speech. In certain regions, the air grew dense and suffocating, saturated with the inexplicable stench of sulphur and decay. Most disturbingly, medieval chronicles documented the rise of what they called the Hollow Men, individuals who appeared ordinary, yet whose vacant eyes betrayed no trace of human awareness. These entities moved undetected among the living, flawlessly imitating human mannerisms while harbouring otherworldly intelligences. They infiltrated royal courts, monasteries, and trade guilds, spreading their influence like a creeping spiritual contagion. Parish priests recorded confessions that defied reason. Penitents spoke of visions of sprawling subterranean cities, inhabited by shadow-born entities offering forbidden knowledge far beyond mortal comprehension. Some described finding themselves in impossible places. Libraries where the books blazed with living fire, gardens where blossoms shrieked in agony, workshops where unfathomable machines forged nightmares into tangible form. The alchemists had long since strayed from their scholarly origins, becoming something far more sinister. Those who endured their cosmic experiments emerged as vessels for alien minds, their humanity supplanted by forces beyond comprehension. No longer did they chase the futile dream of turning lead into gold. Now they sought to warp reality itself, bending it to the will of their otherworldly masters. Their laboratories festered as nexuses of corruption, fissures in the fabric of existence that allowed ever more powerful entities to seep through. When the Church finally recognized the scale of the danger, it mobilized frantic efforts to purge the alchemical taint. Yet they faced an adversary unbound by the rules of ordinary conflict. How does one eradicate a menace that lingers at the edges of reality? How can mere mortals oppose beings who rewrite the laws of physics at whim? The Inquisition's brutal campaigns proved largely ineffective. For every alchemist captured and executed, 2 more arose from the shadows. The corruption had spread too widely, its roots too entrenched to eradicate. Investigators reported that certain alchemical texts appeared to rewrite themselves when left unattended, their formulas shifting to align with whatever eldritch horror the reader sought to summon. Most chilling of all was the realization that the dimensional breaches were not random anomalies, but deliberate steps in a coordinated assault. The entities beyond possessed an intelligence, vast and incomprehensible, their invasion meticulously planned across eons. Medieval alchemy had merely furnished them with the means. Human agents, corrupted by forbidden knowledge, willing to serve as conduits for their reality-warping presence. The catastrophic Cosmic Gateway project, which had claimed countless lives, was but the first move in a far grander scheme. Every successful summoning, every soul stone forged, every homunculus brought into existence further eroded the barriers between worlds. The cumulative damage neared a critical threshold, one that, once crossed, would render the invasion irreversible. Delving into these shadowed annals of medieval history reveals the alchemists' true legacy, not the advancement of natural philosophy, nor the quest for the philosopher's stone, but something far more ominous. They had breached barriers that should have remained eternally closed, unleashing cosmic abominations upon our world and irrevocably distorting reality's fundamental nature. Their heedless experimentation initiated cataclysmic events whose reverberations would span centuries, etching indelible scars upon existence itself, scars that endure even now. Far from heralding respite from these supernatural perils, the medieval era's conclusion merely signalled a new chapter in humanity's desperate battle against entities seeking to reshape our world according to their unfathomable designs. The dark alchemical obsessions that had enthralled medieval practitioners for generations were now nearing their most perilous culmination. What had begun as a noble pursuit transmuting base metals, unlocking the secrets of immortality, had long since shed any semblance of ethical constraint. Their work had transcended the material plane, venturing into realms that defied the very laws of existence. The convergence they sought was no longer theoretical, but an impending catastrophe. Through decades of forbidden knowledge, profane rites, and pacts with entities from beyond the veil, they had perfected the means to rend permanent fissures between dimensions. Unlike their earlier, unstable breaches, these gateways would remain open, sustained conduits for horrors from realms beyond comprehension. The most adept practitioners had forged intricate communication networks spanning continents, disseminating their findings through encrypted manuscripts and arcane symbols, decipherable only by the initiated. In whispered conversations, they spoke of the great work, a culminating ritual designed to unify their disparate endeavours into a singular, monumental undertaking. This would require meticulously synchronized ceremonies conducted at strategic sites throughout Europe, each carefully orchestrated to erode the boundaries between worlds at points where reality's fabric was already frayed. What rendered this convergence especially alarming was the staggering depth of preparation behind it. Generations of alchemists had charted the ley lines and subterranean energy currents, pinpointing the exact locations where their intervention would yield the greatest impact. They had also secured alliances with corrupt nobility and clergy, ensuring both protection and funding when the time arrived for their ultimate experiment. The entities they sought to summon were no mere demons or random spirits, but deliberate, formidable intelligences of immense power beings that had subtly guided their work from its inception. These entities inhabited dimensions where the very laws of physics diverged from human comprehension, realms where matter and energy could be reshaped in ways beyond mortal understanding. The alchemists were convinced that by drawing these beings into the physical world, they would unlock knowledge and abilities to elevate themselves to the stature of gods among men. The true cost of such power was becoming increasingly evident to those who observed the preparations. The chosen ritual sites for the grand undertaking already bore marks of decay, the land itself recoiling from the impending work crops withered, animals fled, and eerie disturbances plagued the surrounding regions. Local inhabitants were tormented by nightmares and waking visions, as though the approaching convergence cast its shadow backward through time. Even the alchemists were not spared. Those most deeply entrenched in the planning exhibited alarming physical and mental transformations, their bodies betraying traits that defied humanity. Some sprouted aberrant sensory organs, granting perception beyond mortal sight. Others found their minds invaded, as if sharing consciousness with the very entities they sought to summon. Though fragmented and often veiled in cipher, the surviving records from this era betray a mounting desperation among the practitioners. They understood their window of opportunity was fleeting. The celestial alignments they needed were exceedingly rare, with the next favourable configuration centuries away. Should they fail to complete the grand endeavour in this cycle, their painstaking efforts would vanish, forcing them to start anew. Even more unsettling were the accounts of those who tried to withdraw from the conspiracy as the convergence drew near. Several alchemists, reconsidering the wisdom of their path, discovered they could not extricate themselves from the very network they had helped forge. Some vanished without a trace, their laboratories bearing marks of violent upheaval. Others were discovered dead under circumstances hinting at forces transcending mortal comprehension. The protective wards and safeguards that had once shielded the alchemists in earlier experiments now faltered against the immense energies they harnessed. Multiple ritual sites met with catastrophic failures, unleashing otherworldly explosions that etched permanent scars upon the land. These events stood as harrowing warnings of the devastation that would unfold if the grand endeavour spiralled out of control. Despite these ominous warnings, the alchemists relentlessly pursued their ambitions. Now, the allure of ultimate knowledge and power propelled them forward, even as mounting evidence revealed they were tampering with forces far beyond their control. They deluded themselves into believing their preparations were adequate, that their grasp of the cosmic energies they manipulated was thorough enough to guarantee success. The culmination of their efforts hinged on crafting vessels capable of harnessing and channeling the convergence's energies. These were no ordinary containers, but intricate masterpieces, blending alchemical precision, architectural ingenuity, and sacred symbolism. Each vessel was meticulously designed to anchor otherworldly entities, ensuring their stable manifestation in the physical realm once the portals were unsealed. Constructing these vessels demanded materials obtainable only through the most extreme means. Human remains were essential, yet not just any remains. The alchemists sought those who had perished under precise conditions, individuals whose life force had been forged by extraordinary suffering or transcendence, plundered graveyards and battlefields, even orchestrating deaths to meet their exact requirements. The psychological burden of these deeds became unmistakable as the practitioners descended into increasingly unstable behaviour. Many displayed symptoms akin to severe mental illness by modern standards, yet they misconstrued these as evidence of their deepening bond with cosmic energies. They claimed to receive direct messages from their otherworldly allies, describing vivid visions of the transformed reality that would follow the impending convergence. Meanwhile, the ordinary world could no longer ignore their actions. Eerie lights flickered in the skies above their laboratories. Unearthly reverberations emanated from their subterranean chambers. Local authorities were inundated with reports of disappearances and unsettling findings they could neither explain nor pursue effectively. Even the church, despite pockets of corruption, marshalled its resources to confront what it rightly identified as a menace to the existing order. Yet the alchemists had foreseen opposition and had already devised countermeasures to dismantle it. Their network comprised influential operatives capable of diverting investigations and concealing incriminating evidence. Leveraging esoteric knowledge, they had engineered advanced weaponry and defensive systems that far surpassed conventional military capability. Multiple assault attempts on their facilities proved catastrophic for the assailants, with surviving personnel recounting experiences that defied rational explanation. As the pivotal ritual drew near, the alchemists congregated at the primary site, a location selected for its exceptional geological and arcane attributes. This gathering of practitioners from across Europe marked the zenith of centuries of meticulous orchestration. They carried with them the collective wisdom of their tradition, along with the specialized artifacts and instruments required for the final rite. Over time, the site had been altered beyond recognition, its natural features supplanted by unnatural constructs. Intricate geometric designs etched into the ground and infused with luminescent substances, pulsed with an eerie radiance. The erected structures warped the surrounding space, distorting perception and confounding observers attempting to gauge their true dimensions. The atmosphere itself thrummed with latent energy, as if poised on the brink of revelation. Crackling with energies that defied conventional measurement, the atmosphere grew increasingly unstable. Even as the alchemists stood on the brink of triumph, a disquieting doubt took root among them. Had they truly comprehended the forces they were unleashing? The entities they had communed with now demanded ever greater sacrifices, their requests escalating far beyond the original pact. Ominous signs suggested these beings pursued their own inscrutable designs, which might diverge sharply from the alchemists' ambitions for power and enlightenment. The convergence they had painstakingly orchestrated was slipping from their grasp, its trajectory no longer theirs to dictate. The forces they had awakened now surged with an independent momentum, drawing strength from unforeseen sources. The ritual, once meticulously planned, unfolded of its own accord, heedless of their will. They were swept into currents of cosmic energy forces they could shape but never fully command. And in the abyss beyond the veil, ancient minds, patient through eons, stirred at last, poised to cross into a reality they would reshape according to their unfathomable will. As our exploration of medieval alchemy's dark legacy reveals, the corruption and dimensional ruptures wrought by these forbidden practitioners left wounds that would persist long after the Middle Ages had faded into history. Yet the true terror resides not in what was destroyed, but in what persists unseen, lurking within the shadows of our contemporary age. The alchemical networks that endured the great purges of the 15th century did not merely fade into oblivion. They transformed, refined their methods, and retreated further into secrecy. The Brotherhood of the Crimson Veil, the Order of the Obsidian Crucible, and countless lesser covens dispersed across Europe, each safeguarding shards of the most perilous wisdom ever devised. These survivors recognized that their endeavors had become too potent, too exposed. The rifts they had rent between dimensions, the beings they had conjured, the very threads of reality they had unraveled, all necessitated a more discreet path forward. In the desolate monasteries of secluded mountain passes, in the neglected vaults beneath time-worn universities, in the hidden chambers of aristocratic estates whose lineages traced back to the original adepts, their work endured. Yet now it was concealed beneath new guises. What were once primitive transmutation circles, etched into stone floors, evolved into elaborate geometric motifs, embroidered into tapestries, and woven into the very bones of architecture. The emblems once displayed on laboratory walls gradually found their way into family crests, religious symbols, and guild insignia. This knowledge endured, carefully encoded, yet concealed in plain view. The practitioners themselves assumed new roles. Gone were the days of wild-eyed recluses toiling alone in remote towers, transformed into esteemed scholars, powerful merchants, and even high-ranking clergy. Mastering the art of subterfuge, they communicated through veiled academic exchanges and conducted their most perilous experiments under the guise of legitimate research. The University of Prague, Venice's great libraries, and the workshops of master craftsmen unwittingly harboured clandestine circles of alchemical conspirators, gathering in shadows, whispering of the grand work that must persist. Yet the most unsettling development was their shift in recruitment. Where alchemical wisdom had once been fiercely hoarded by solitary masters, the survivors now understood that their ultimate ambitions demanded a wider network of allies. They sought out promising students, young, eager minds thirsting for forbidden knowledge, individuals whose ambition or desperation rendered them vulnerable to the seductive allure of transmutation and power. The recruits were gradually inducted, their training meticulously overseen, their allegiance proven through progressively perilous missions. The initiation rites grew increasingly refined and psychologically harrowing. Neophytes were compelled to partake in ceremonies that would forever bind them to the cause. They bore witness to the summoning of entities from beyond dimensional confines, took part in the ritual sacrifice of both beasts and men, and were made to ingest alchemical concoctions that warped their very perception of existence. Those who endured these trials emerged irrevocably altered, their minds now attuned, however partially, to the alien geometries and unfathomable mathematics that formed the foundation of the alchemist's craft. Over the decades, these clandestine networks began assembling what they termed the Eternal Archive, a dispersed repository of the most perilous alchemical knowledge, meticulously duplicated and concealed in countless locations across the continent. Unlike the crude grimoires of earlier practitioners, these texts were masterpieces, illuminated manuscripts that, to the untrained eye, resembled pious scriptures or classical works. Yet to those versed in the arcane ciphers, they revealed precise methodologies for breaching dimensional gateways, formulae for engineering homunculi endowed with heightened intellect and preternatural prowess, and, most chilling of all, the theoretical underpinnings of what the alchemists deemed the final synthesis. The final synthesis embodied the culmination of centuries of research, no less than the total transmutation of human consciousness and physical reality itself. Where their predecessors had pursued mere metallurgical transmutation or the elixir of life, these shadowed masters recognized such ambitions as but preliminary steps toward a far more profound ascension. They envisioned a world where dimensional barriers would cease to exist, where human consciousness could merge directly with the cosmic entities they had encountered, and where the fundamental laws of physics could be reshaped through alchemical mastery. Yet realizing this ambitious vision demanded more than mere scientific understanding. It required nothing less than the complete transformation of human civilization itself. Operating in secrecy, the alchemists maneuvered into positions of power, leveraging their esoteric knowledge and alliances with otherworldly forces to amass wealth, political authority, and societal dominance. They infiltrated royal courts, manipulated global trade networks, and even steered the outcomes of wars and epidemics to cultivate the conditions they deemed essential for their final victory. The Renaissance, that celebrated era of intellectual and artistic flourishing, was quietly steered by these shadowy architects in ways historians have yet to uncover. The patronage behind groundbreaking art and scientific breakthroughs often carried hidden stipulations, subtle demands to embed specific symbols, adhere to precise geometric principles, or select locations aligned with dimensional fractures. Even the era's brightest minds, from Leonardo da Vinci to Galileo Galilei, unwittingly contributed to experiments whose true objectives remained concealed from them. All the while, the dimensional ruptures caused by centuries of alchemical experimentation continued to widen. The entities summoned in medieval laboratories never fully retreated when the portals sealed. They lingered, their presence seeping into the fabric of reality. numerous entities persisted, lingering in the interstices between realities, gradually expanding the fissures through which they had first appeared. Across Europe, bizarre occurrences proliferated with unsettling regularity. Towns where shadows detached from their sources, forests teeming with creatures defying natural law, and ancient structures whose architecture subtly reconfigured when unobserved. Though the Church publicly denounced alchemy, it became increasingly infiltrated by practitioners who cloaked their work as orthodox theological inquiry. Certain monasteries transformed into hubs of esoteric research, blending Christian mysticism with alchemical methods to pioneer unprecedented forms of dimensional manipulation. The Inquisition, tasked with eradicating heresy, often pursued mere phantoms, while genuine dangers festered within its own ranks. By the advent of the modern age, the successors of medieval alchemy had evolved into something far more perilous than their forebears could have conceived. They mastered patience, subtlety, and the art of leveraging established institutions rather than opposing them. The overt laboratories and conspicuous symbols of early practitioners had yielded to a sprawling clandestine network of knowledge and influence spanning continents. Most ominously of all, they had learned to measure their ambitions not in years, but in centuries. They believed the ultimate synthesis was not an endeavour to be accomplished within a single generation, but rather the crowning achievement of a centuries-spanning endeavour destined to transform reality itself. Each successive generation of practitioners was charged not with finalising the work, but with propelling it forward, laying the groundwork upon which future breakthroughs would rise. The grim reality of medieval alchemy, therefore, is not merely that it was a misguided pseudoscience or a hazardous yet ultimately constrained pursuit. It marked the inception of something far more audacious and unsettling, a conspiracy spanning centuries, engineered to fundamentally redefine human existence and the very fabric of reality. The cryptic symbols etched into laboratory walls, the beings conjured from beyond known dimensions, the homunculi cultivated in glass vessels, the rifts in space that marred the land. These were but the nascent phases of an undertaking that persists even now, cloaked beneath veneers of legitimacy, advancing toward objectives that would have defied the comprehension of the primitive alchemists who first breached the forbidden thresholds. Contemporary researchers working across academia, government labs, corporate R&D centres, and the upper echelons of finance and politics continue to pursue the same foundational aspiration that motivated their medieval forebears. Their goal remains nothing short of overcoming human constraints by harnessing forces that transcend conventional spatial and temporal limits. Unlike their isolated and ill-equipped predecessors, today's practitioners benefit from centuries of accumulated wisdom, cutting-edge technological resources, and an unwavering confidence in their eventual triumph. The unsettling reality is that medieval alchemy never truly vanished, it merely evolved. Examining this YouTube script on medieval alchemy, I can construct a gripping closing paragraph that preserves the ominous tone and enigmatic aura woven throughout the narrative. Here's a striking conclusion. As we unveil the most sinister secrets of medieval alchemy, we confront a disturbing truth that reverberates across time. These were not merely eccentric scholars chasing fantastical ambitions, but tormented individuals who meddled with incomprehensible powers, leaving behind a legacy etched in blood, madness, and hushed admonitions. Though the alchemists failed to turn lead into gold, they succeeded in becoming enduring warnings that linger in history's darkest corners. Perhaps certain knowledge was never meant to be uncovered, and some thresholds should remain eternally closed,